Namaskar, a very good afternoon to all of you, and welcome all of you to this session uh, on a talk on ethics of belief to be delivered by Dr. Sudhnya Kulkarni of University of Delhi. It is in the philosophy discipline. This afternoon, we have the guest speaker, Dr. Sudhnya Kulkarni, who is Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy in University of Delhi in Janki Devi Memorial College. She is also in charge of Non-Collegiate Women's Education Board, University of Delhi. She is member of a number of college committees such as Enabling Unit, Annual Prize Committee, Hostel Committee. She is member Departmental Syllabus Review Committee in the main Department of Philosophy in the University of Delhi. She is also Nodal Officer Examination in her college and has been a member of the Evaluation Committee of the Open Book Examination Committee in University of Delhi. She has published a book on philosopher Kant's political thought and research publications, 2 articles in Scopus Index journals on philosophical issues. With that brief introduction, we welcome Dr. Sudhnya Kulkarni to this session of Gyan Darshan. Her topic is ethics of belief. So, Dr. Sudhnya, with that, you begin and introduce the topic to us.
Okay. Good afternoon, dear friends. As Professor Nandini has already explained, the topic that I'm going to be talking about and discussing is a topic which has often been considered under philosophy of religion, and this is titled as The Ethics of Belief. And the article that I'm going to be discussing today has been written by W.K. Clifford, William Kingdon Clifford, way back in 1877. The article was published in a journal called Contemporary Review. William Clifford was a mathematician, a philosopher, and the article basically is looking to analyze what can be the basis of our beliefs. The article is basically remembered for two very important points of focus which are there in the article. One is a story, and the story which is based on a principle. So, to begin with, the article actually starts with the story of a ship owner who decides to send his ship out to sea full of immigrants who are wanting to go to a foreign land, who are leaving their fatherland in search of better opportunities to make, lives better for themselves, their children, and the coming future generations. And the ship owner has been sending the ship out, every time to different shores. This time around also, the ship is full of immigrants. The ship owner is ready to send the ship out to sea, but there are certain niggling doubts in his mind. Now, the reason for those niggling doubts is because the ship of late has not been seaworthy. There have been certain breakdowns, certain problems with the machinery, and the ship owner has these doubts and questions which often come to his mind whether or not the ship is capable of making that journey at all. Combined with the fact that so many people or immigrants are going to be traveling on that ship to foreign shores. Now, instead of overhauling, examining, looking at what all the repairs the ship might need, the ship owner basically just rests his beliefs, or rather, let's say, rests his doubts or suppresses those doubts, takes recourse in providence, and allows the ship to sail. It so happens that the ship sinks in the middle of the ocean. The ship owner pockets the insurance money, and as there are no survivors, there are no tales told. Now, Clifford, by giving this example, is asking us, how do we look at the ship owner's behavior, the ship owner's responsibility, the ship owner's character, and also where are we going to put his beliefs? and the ethics behind his belief formation. So, according to Clifford, in this particular example, of course, the onus and the responsibility is with the ship owner. Why? Because he had doubts in his mind. He knew that the ship was not seaworthy, it needed repairs. But instead of looking into those doubts, niggling doubts, even though they may have been, the ship owner did not address those doubts and he allowed the ship to sail. Now, Clifford alters this example a little and he says, suppose that the ship actually set out, sailed, it went safe and sound, goes, and all the people who are going to foreign land, they disembark, the ship comes back safe and sound and goes on to make many more journeys and forays into the ocean and into foreign land. The fact that the ship has forayed on, made many more trips, and it comes back, does it ensure or does it lead to the fact that the ship owner is not guilty anymore? Is a question that Clifford is asking. Clifford's response is no, not one jot, as he says in his article. Why? The only reason is that the ship, no doubt, sailed, made many more journeys, many of them successful, it came back. But the niggling doubts that were there, they did not materialize into the ship sinking. But the problem with the machinery of the ship, the seaworthiness of the ship, remained. And he did not address those. So, according to Clifford, the responsibility does not go away from the ship owner simply because the ship went on to make so many more journeys which were safe and sound, and people were able to travel and come back safe and sound. He gives another example. The reason that he's given these examples in this article, it's a brief article, not a very long article, is somewhere to demonstrate to us what would be, the basis of belief formation. What can be the ground, or, how should we move in the direction of belief formation. Now, the next example, he talks about an island which is inhabited by people. And in that island, there are certain teachers. Now, those teachers gather children of the inhabitants and they go about giving them instruction about religion. But when they're giving them instructions about religion, they are not teaching them about particular religious doctrines of a particular religion. They are simply talking to them about religion in general. Some amongst the inhabitants start spreading a rumor that those teachers who are instructing the children are misleading them, and they're corrupting the mind of the children. And those people are able to influence all the parents, and they go about maligning the character of those teachers. Now, in this example too, no investigation is done, but the character of the teachers is maligned. Again, Clifford alters this example a little and he says, what if those who took on this responsibility of checking out, finding whether or not those teachers had actually indulged in such an act of corrupting the mind of the young, and they find that actually no, they were not corrupting the mind, they were simply instructing them about certain religious practices, beliefs, which were not belonging to a particular religion, but which were discussing rational, you could say, practices in an open manner. What would they find? Would it again lessen their responsibility? According to Clifford, no. Likewise, in both these examples, the first ones and the altered examples, what is it that Clifford is trying to tell us time and again? He is basically trying to tell us time and again that how important it is to gather evidence. Without gathering evidence, if we go on to form our belief systems, how does that help, or does that help at all? Now, he says that in both these cases, if you look at both the examples, what do you find? He says that the shipowner, as well as those who maligned the character of the teachers, they were both guilty. They were guilty, they were responsible. Why? Because the soundness of their beliefs regarding the ship owners, regarding the seaworthiness of his ship, and that of the people who were involved in maligning the teachers, none of them had actually earned their beliefs on the basis of investigation. There, the ship owner based it on hearsay, or rather, let's put it, he based it on providence. He had his faith in God, and he thought, okay, that's what's going to carry my ship, and it's going to make sound, too many journeys, it will come back safe and sound. Those who were maligning the character of the teachers were also not wanting to get into any kind of investigative techniques. So here, Clifford is saying that those convictions were not based basically on what? On suppression of doubts that came in the mind of the ship owner as well as those who were maligning the characters. And since the ship owner had not acquired his belief through a patient inquiry. Now, Clifford next asks, like I discussed earlier, in both these examples, he says, what is it that is important? He says it's not so much the fact that the belief that the ship owner or those maligners of character or those teachers have formed is important. What is important is the belief leads to certain actions. The belief leads to certain behavioral patterns. And that is why any basis or foundation for a belief is extremely important, because it leads to actions. And for that, Clifford says that the same can be said about the villagers too, because they did not indulge in a thorough investigation before maligning the teachers. Now, time and again in the article, Clifford has discussed at large, emphasizing the principle that it is wrong, and he states it very clearly that it is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone. So it's wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. And it is because, he says, it has ramifications for all kinds of belief, including religious beliefs. Whether it be an epistemic belief, whether it be a logical belief, whether it be a religious belief, whether it be a practical belief, a prudent belief, whatever it may be, but this fact that according to him it is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. Now, for Clifford, the first thing that he points out is that it's our necessary duty. It is our necessary duty to have or to make thorough investigation. Why? Because beliefs are connected. How are they connected? Because they lead to actions. Actions that flow from the beliefs that we form. Because it leads to actions, that is why it is important that we do a thorough investigation before we get down to belief formulation. Second, he says, even if a belief, suppose, does not lead to immediate action, what happens? We store that belief. We keep it embedded deep inside us. Somewhere that belief may crop up later, and it may be of some use to us. It may lead or guide us into doing some kind of an action. But if that belief has not been earned through patient inquiry or investigation, then that belief is not going to serve any purpose. So that's the second reason he believes, because there is a future reference for that belief and the action that it will lead to. So corollary to this is that no belief, however, whatever be the nature of belief, is insignificant. It is full of significance because it leads to overt actions. The third point that Clifford wants to make is that any belief that we hold, even if it's a belief that you may be holding or I may be holding, is private, because all of us are interconnected. We are part of a group, social group. Our beliefs go on to influence each other. So he says they are part of one compacted whole that includes words, phrases, metaphors, sentences, which have been passed down, according to Clifford, from one generation to another. And how is it that these beliefs are passed on from one generation to the other? They are polished. They are somewhere, if some beliefs have become redundant, we discard some of them. Maybe there are some aspects of that belief which are no longer relevant. We may add some aspects to those beliefs. And that's how it's like an heirloom, which we are polishing, we are nurturing, we are purifying, and then we are handing it over from one generation to another. So that is what Clifford is talking about when he says that no individual's belief is private. Next, he says in both the examples, if you have a look, the belief held by one man, the impact it had and the influence it had on the lives of so many. So if the ship owner's belief in providence, in the first example, if we see, where he did not think it necessary or deem it necessary to go in for a thorough inspection of his ship before sending it out to sea, led to the loss of immigrants' life. No one survived. No one survived to tell tales. But the onus on the death of those immigrants rests with the ship owner. Same would be those who are casting a doubt on the teachers. If the teachers were jailed or if the teachers were maligned, then all those who raised those questions about the teacher's character were responsible for maligning, indicting teachers for no fault of theirs without a thorough inquiry. So he says, and that in both the examples, beliefs held by one man or by a group of men have influenced and impacted the lives of many others.
Right. May I ask I have one interesting curiosity in mind. Does Clifford mention that belief changes over generations? Does he discuss that?
Yeah, actually, he says that no belief is fixed once
Fixed
and for
or
all.
static, right?
Yeah. The reason he says is in fact, he concludes the article with that, and he says that if suppose someone were to say that I am busy and I have no time and I do not think that my beliefs need to be changed, then he says actually that person should not hold any opinions and beliefs at all. Because like you said, beliefs are something which are constantly growing.
Growing, right?
They are growing and they do they should change.
Yes, yes.
They have to be out there in open to be discussed and to be examined.
Yes.
So it is something which is growing all the time. So he says that in both these examples, why was it extremely important for the ship owner and the teachers and the investigators to focus on how they had acquired their beliefs? Because the impact of the beliefs was tremendous. And if the beliefs, he says, had been earned through a patient inquiry, toil, reasoned argument, then he says they would have withstood the test of time, as you said. And such beliefs, if beliefs are gathered or they grow or they're examined through reasoned arguments, then they help in binding. They become binding forces of any social group, be it an individual, amongst individuals, or amongst groups of people. That is why it is important to have beliefs to be examined time and again. Now, for Clifford, it is our bounden duty. It is our bounden duty of not only in every individual, but of every leader statesmen, and he even goes on to say philosophers, and he says for the person who may be working in a field, for a housewife who may be working in a kitchen, for each one of us, it's our bounden duty to investigate the belief that I have by patient inquiry. Why? Because we all have, according to him, a universal duty. And what is that universal duty? Of questioning all that we believe. Unless and until we question what we believe, how are we going to provide a solid basis or sound foundation for knowledge to grow? For knowledge to grow, it will all remain at the level of opinion.
Yes.
So he says that if suppose the belief has been earned through patient inquiry, then what does it do? It, and reasoned debate, then it is something like a common property. And it helps in binding people all over the world. The society, according to him, if any society does not allow for beliefs to be earned through patient inquiry, he says it can actually become a den of thieves. And in no point of time, the society can simply become a land of savages. For there is no reasoned inquiry, there is no investigation that is involved, there is no debate, there is no contemplation, there is no analysis, nothing of that kind which will help us understand why am I holding on to a particular set of beliefs. And like you said, Professor Nandini, that inquiry, it is not once and for all. That's
Right.
what Clifford is constantly reminding us.
Right.
And he says inquiry cannot be settled once and for all. Rather, it's an ongoing process. It is an ongoing process.
Yes.
So, according to him, we must never ever stifle our doubts. And for if we do that, he says, then we actually have no right to believe. If we go on stifling our doubts, then we have no right to believe. And as I said, Clifford was seen as an evidentialist because he believed in the soundness of evidence before one would go on to hold any position vis-a-vis, religion, epistemology, or any other discipline that was there in philosophy. And he says we are allowed to form our beliefs only on the basis of sufficient evidence that we have in our possession. Something which, Clifford has time and again analyzed. Now, if one were to analyze this position of evidentialism vis-a-vis the concept of God, as one does in philosophy of religion, it becomes an interesting take because somewhere, whether you analyze it from the position of a theistic position, or whether you analyze it from the aspect of atheism, where would one place Clifford? Because so far as the concept of God goes, or belief in God goes as a reality, those who believe in him do not have access to evidence, the kind that we have when we talk about any material reality, which is available to us through our sense experience, which can be corroborated through our sense experience. The same kind of corroboration for us is not available when it comes to God. So, evidentialism of that kind, when it's not available to us vis-a-vis God, where would that lead us to in philosophy? Would definitely challenge the concept of God. And the arguments that have been put forward by various philosophers in the 12th century, the ontological argument which was put forward by St. Anselm, or St. Thomas Aquinas went on to put forward his cosmological argument regarding the existence of God, or whether William Paley went on to put down his argument, design argument, or the teleological argument for the existence of God. Now, both so far as Aquinas goes and so far as William Paley go, they both have referred to certain examples from the world in which we are to demonstrate that there's design, there's a pattern, and all this pattern, when we look at nature and our position in the nature and all the events that are happening in nature, point to a reality which is beyond our comprehension, which we cannot see as we see each other. But for sure, there is God. If that aspect is taken as part of evidentialism, maybe Clifford could accept it, because, but again, those who challenge those arguments definitely say that that evidence shows us patterns of behavior in nature. How do they lead us to the concept of an existential God who is not visible, or who is present in another transcendental level, or who's operating out there, is something which both the philosophers Thomas Aquinas and William Paley have not been able to demonstrate. And when it comes to Saint Anselm, for sure, he's of course not argued from the concept of the world to the concept of God, but he has argued for it from our a priori understanding. And so, from that point of view, evidentialism in religion is an interesting take, and it leads to many more questions, and it definitely makes us understand that belief formation is important, and an investigation for beliefs is our bounden duty. And I would like to conclude with that, Professor Nandini. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sudhya, for a very, very interesting, illuminating, and enlightening talk on ethics of belief. I was just wondering, like, when it comes to evidentialism versus existence of God, right? What kind of evidences does a philosopher look for? Is it objective, like through daily experiences one is looking for the existence of God, or there is or scriptures one is falling on?
Yeah, see, so scriptures one follows, one definitely has, certain personal experiences too. But can they go on to establish the concept of God in a manner, let's say we have, say, the concept of the stable, or say the concept, like in, you have the concept of, say, of, proton,
Material
something.
object, yes, yes.
In that sense, that is not available
Right.
to us
Yes, yes.
in philosophy of religion.
Yes,
It's
yes,
difficult, it's challenging for sure, but there have been arguments which have been given to substantiate to
The
existence of God.
Okay. Thank you so much,
Thank you, Professor
Dr. Sudhya, for a very, very enlightening and interesting talk. I'm sure it will benefit our listeners, viewers, and learners, particularly from the background of philosophy. With that, we come to this end of this session. Once again, namaskar.
Namaskar. Namaskar.
In the current global economy and digital era, learn or perish is the order of the day for all adults in all sectors of life. As a result, adult education and lifelong learning have assumed great significance. IGNOU as a national university has played its role by way of coming up with the Master of Arts in Adult Education program, MAAE.
MAAE program focuses on different aspects of theory and practice, policies and programs, as well as research, among other things related to adult education.
MAE is a 2-year modular program with multiple entry and exit options. Students who complete first year of the program will be awarded with the postgraduate diploma in adult education. In case they want to continue, they will complete the second year program and they will be awarded with the Master of Arts in adult education.
MAE program consists of 10 courses, 5 courses in each year, 8 theory courses, 6 credits worth, and 1 practical course of 10 credits in the first year and one dissertation course of 10 credits in the second.
Practical course of MAAE is divided into three components, namely community based practical activities, workshop based practical activities, and adult education training center or institution based practical activities, and the student has to complete all the three components for completion of this practical course.
The minimum qualification required for admission to this program is bachelor's degree from any recognized university. The minimum duration is 2 years and the maximum duration is 4 years.
Instructional system follows multimedia approach. The major medium of instruction is self-learning print materials, which is supplemented by other media such as audio video programs, broadcasting, that is interactive.
Hi viewers, welcome to the live session on 5G, the driving force for effective online learning. Myself, Dr. A. Murli M. Rao, the Director of IT Division, Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. So this live session precisely on the 5G, in online learning, what are the technological components involved, and various aspects of or features of 5G, and how the 5G enables or uses for effective online learning, and concluded by a concluding message. The talk is precisely again on the 5G, its technological components, the features of 5G, how the 5G enables online learning more effective, with a concluding message. See viewers, we all know that the present next generation networks is 5G, fifth generation mobile communications network. Of course, there are the predecessor generations also available. Right now we are using. So 4G, prior to that 3G, then 2G, and even below 1G. Of course, the 5G is already operational or established in various developed countries. Of course, in India also very soon on metros and some other going to start, already started it seems in some of the metro cities. Mostly for online learning. Of course, there are many technological components are there, but the network plays a vital role as a carrier to transmit the data or information, whatever we say in academic sense, to be transmitted from source to destination. It means that from a resource person to a student, wherever he or she is. So this talk mainly focuses or emphasis on the 5G and its effectiveness for effective delivery of or effective online learning. See, online learning refers to delivery of instruction, maybe you call it as a subject, electronically by using software applications or software tools through internet in a virtualized learning environment. See, virtualized learning environment means that it's a complete a setup been established between the institution and the stakeholders or maybe a student. Suppose some session is going to happen or going to do that. So, it is a closed virtual environment between the resource person and the student, correct? So, it refers to a delivery of instruction are called as a subject electronically by using software applications or tools over internet. But see, in a traditional institution, we all know that in a traditional institution, so a teacher will be there. Generally, the teaching learning happens in a classroom, correct? The teacher is there and students are in a class where they directly in a physical presence and it will be. But when we talk about online learning, student is a distant, resource person is distant, but see that with the help of some kind of syncing and technologies, see that the instruction which is delivering to reach without uh, any disruptions. So that's why this online learning compulsory network plays a vital role for a effective online learning. See, let's see that what are the technological components that are involved or needed in online learning. One is that academic resources could be audio video lectures, might be live or maybe offline, and e-books, SLM, report, presentation, quizzes, and many such which are useful to a learner to gain some knowledge, to know something about the subject. So, we all comes under academic resources. Similarly, the second technological component is that virtualized learning environment. Viewers, as I told you, that is a set of teaching and learning tools designed to enhance a student's learning experience using educational technologies. So, education technologies mean that these are all which are useful for a learning. Correct? Could be some kind of a software tools, maybe LMS, CMS, OERs, and many such things, or even some kind of audio tools, video conferencing, all together, working together, syncing together for a delivery of instruction online or virtually. That we call it as a virtualized environment. The first one is that academic resources. Also, we call once we talk about online learning, so academic resources are digital academic resources. And second is virtualized learning environment, and third is computing and storage devices, that is ultimately it is needed, correct? So otherwise whatever the virtualized environment which supports for delivery of instruction online or virtually, so for that compulsory a computing and storage device are needed where all these things will be deployed or hosted in that. And the last one is that telecommunications networks. Now, the main talk of today's session is mainly on telecommunication network. Of course, we are talking about 5G. So, 5G is nothing but the telecommunications network. So, viewers, these are all the four principal components that are required or involved for effective online learning. Just see that telecommunications networks are the means of communication, means of electronic transmission of information. The information could be in form of a plain text or maybe audio or a video or maybe some images between computing devices. It means that could be a desktop or maybe a laptop or a tablet or a smartphone or many similar such devices. So the networks are the means of electronic transmission. Once we talk about online learning, so nothing but the delivery of instruction happens in form of electronic transmission, okay, of information. So the networks are either wired or wireless. So wired are mostly these are all fiber optic network, and wireless Wi-Fi or WiMAX. Now again second one is that the mobile telecommunications network, that is a 1G first generation, second, third, fourth generation, and now fifth generation. The talk of today's topic is that 5G and how it acts as a driving force for effective online learning. See, 5G technology, so is a fifth generation wireless mobile communication network technology, provides higher speed, lower latency and greater capacity than 4G networks. Generally, no, whenever we talk about technological generations, once we talk about 5G, so always we have to talk about, we have to compare with the 4G, the existing network, which is 4G. So the 5G is far so better features than the existing fourth generation network, that is called 4G, in terms of speed, in terms of latency, less latency, and in terms of connected devices within a unit geographic area, and probably in terms of security, privacy, and so on. So the 5G networks stimulates innovation and transform the way we live, the way we learn, the way we work, the way we play. This is the beauty of the 5G technology, or this is the 5G what for? It means that the way we live, the way we learn, the way we work, the way we play. It means that mostly it is user centric and readily available on demand. See, we will see that some of the features of the 5G networks or 5G technology: high increased peak bit rate and bandwidth, high capacity to allow more devices connectivity concurrently and instantaneously. It means first thing is a very high increased peak bit rate, high speed. It means that it is up to even 10 gigabits per second. See, whatever data it's supposed to download, it is that it is almost, it takes up to 10 gigabits per second, and also it supports higher bandwidth. Second is that high capacity to allow more devices connectivity. Because of its capacity, it allows more devices to connect to that network. And third is that very low latency, less than a millisecond. It means that the delay, suppose once you want to send some data from some X device to Y device, the delay is less than 1 millisecond. It means that almost it is negligible. But when we talk about 4G, delay is a bit more. When we talk about 3G, still delay is more. It means that the time taken to transmit the data from source to destination, that we call it as a delay. But in a 5G network, that delay is in form, we also call as a latency. The delay is in 5G network, it is less than 1 millisecond, and larger number of supporting devices. It means that many different devices the 5G network support to connect it, and higher reliability of communication. It means that even though once we connect to the 5G, suppose say once we connect, even though we are So traveling even at 300 kilometers per hour or even up to 400 kilometers per hour, still the link sustains. That's why we call it as the reliability of communication and also the uptime. So these are all some of the features of the 5G networks. Even you see the diagram also, diagrammatic also, we can see that it is a 100 times more devices. It supports 100 times more devices when comparing with 4G. So virtually zero latency. As I told you that the latency, the delay in the transmission of data from source to destination is that less than 1 millisecond, and speed up to 10 gigabits per second. See that huge volume of data either can be transmitted from X to Y or can be downloaded in vice versa, and wide range of applications. So ubiquitous connectivity and more software options to upgrade and very high capacity and so on. So these are all some of the prominent 5G technological features. That's why, because of this high capacity, high reliable, high supportive, high secure network, that's why the online learning, when we talk about online learning, it means that whatever a lecture or whatever a lecturer or a teacher would like to take a class of a 1 hour or a 45 minutes, see that without delay, there should not be any syncing problem. It means it looks like that the student should feel that even though he is remote to the resource person, but he or she feels that he is in the class. So that kind of a syncing is needed. So for that, high data transmission capacity networks are required. So that's why the 5G, why I'm talking about 5G for online effective online learning and acting as a driving force is that because of all these features like high speed, high speed is a high speed network, low latency, more connected devices, high reliability. With all these all these features, definitely the 5G becoming a driving force for a online learning, where the resource person is at one place and the learners or students are scattered across globe. But even though every student, whenever a session starts, that the learner feels that he or she is closely connected and feel an experience of that he or she is in a class. And next is that just see that the 5G networks technology in online learning. How, what way the 5G technology or 5G networks technology in supports or enhances in online learning. See, 5G network enhances smart classroom experience. But as I told you that, so when a class started, a virtual class started, where the class consists of so many, that, so audio video devices and the teacher teaches, but learners are remote at place, but all together feels that they are in one classroom. That's why these 5G networks, because of those prominent features, so learners will feel the experience of a real classroom, even it is a smart classroom. The another is that so it will enhances the virtual labs, simulation, cloud computing solutions. See, one thing is that even to do some kind of a practicals or to do some kind of experiments, even it is virtual, but because of the greater and prominent features of this 5G technology and acting as some backbone in transmission, so it enhances virtual labs, even though the student or learner feels that he or she is really doing an experience, even it is virtual, but because of its syncing in nature, clarity in nature, then the student feels that he or she is doing the real practicals, and student will get the real practical experiences. See, for example, see, if you see that even in a YouTube viewers, we have, I think there are so many even very high definition or ultra definition videos are available. Maybe even in a 3D, even if you see that some of the medical, some videos in a medical field, suppose how heart beats or how human digestion system worked. If you see that the 3D videos, it looks like that how clarity it is. So because but which requires higher bandwidth, high speed network, and more reliable network. So that's why the 5G is answer for it. That's why what I would like to say is that why it become a driving force is that because of its features. That's why for to do the virtual labs and simulations, so for that higher bandwidth is needed without any latency. So this is one of another is that greater use of AI applications in teaching, learning, examination, assessment, and evaluation. So for these AI applications also requires high bandwidth, high speed networks, more reliable network. That's why again the answer is the 5G. So the another is that greater use of augmented and virtual reality that stimulates immersive learning. It means that student feels that even though he is watching say suppose certain video, or he is watching in some session, watching certain scenes, if he or she feels that his presence is at that place, that what we call it as a immersive learning. So for that also the high speed networks are required. So that's why the 5G stimulates immersive learning. And another is that the 5G also support personalized and global learning. It means that because in a virtualized environment, a student will be totally his or her activities are captured, and the AI tools and technologies with machine learning techniques always it will study continuously. It will study continuously and prepare some kind of a statistics. So with that, the resource person knows, even a learner also knows that how good he is, how average it is. So that's why it helps a lot. Such kind of analytics helps a lot for personalized learning. And another is that global learning also. It means that like MOOCs and if you take such kind of thing where massive number of students can learn at one go, that we call it as even this global learning. And another is that nowadays new pedagogy also coming up other than the traditional pedagogies. So the gamification, where to have the more the student more target centric learning. So gamification is one of that, so that some problem will be given and see that get the solution. So for that also because it is online learning, so high speed networks are needed, more reliable networks are required, and also higher bandwidth is needed. So for that again the 5G is the answer for it. And greater collaboration across vast boundaries, mobile learning, effective research, and effective even administration too. So when we talk about online learning, so whatever the academic instruction is needed in terms of for a student, for a learner, so all these things requires in a in a virtual learning. So all these requires apart from the hardware, apart from the software, the computers, servers, the tools, XYZ, apart from that, a good high bandwidth, high speed network is needed. Then only a student feels that he or she is in close with the resource person and have an experience of learning in a closed classroom. So these are all some of the areas where the 5G networks enables or even enhances the teaching and even the learning process in a online environment or online learning environment. And see that this AI also supports the greater use of AI application. Even the AI application tools being deployed for what? Automated student guidance and advice, AI-enabled tutoring, AI-enabled assessment, for all these things which requires high-speed network and high bandwidth. So for that, the 5G is the answer for it. And similarly, big data with analytics, because huge volume of data being generated, but again for analyzing that, so for that again the high speed networks are needed, so that analytics can be done faster on large scale for a fast track of student performance, assess the need for additional support to students, assess the need for even revision of a course too. So these are all some of the application areas of 5G in terms of online learning. Even instant assessment skills and capabilities also. It means that AI generated assessment on demand, video based assessment, and so on. So for all these things, so a high speed and more reliable networks are needed, and for that the 5G is the answer for it. And even 5G support even a greater collaborative across vast boundaries. So viewers, of course, whenever we talk about some technology in terms of merits or in terms of advantages, so compulsory there are some limitations or demerits or maybe so challenges. So the 5G challenges are, so device compatibility. It means that not all devices are compatible to the 5G networks, and security and privacy is also one of the concerns, and deployment and its coverage also. And generally 5G is a bit cost to build, cost to buy, and even the frequency bands is also some of the issues and challenges. So these are all, but of course when we talk about the 5G in a positive sense, it has enormous applications, enormous features, so that helps a lot for especially for online learning. So that's why, as I told you that, so the 5G becoming a driving force for effective online learning with the help of its features like more high speed networks, more bandwidth, less latency, and high reliability, and so on. So viewers, I would like to conclude this session with a message. 5G networks are these are all intelligent networks going to be a backbone of communication and becoming a driving force for effective online learning. So viewers, I hope this session enlightens you to know something about 5G and its features and how it become a driving force for effective online learning. Thank you, viewers. Thanks for listening.
Hello friends, are you interested to pursue MA Education program? School of Education, Indira Gandhi National Open University offers a quality MA Education program, and this is one of the popular program of IGNOU. This program has awarded as the best master degree program of IGNOU. Let us focus upon the objectives of the program. To enable learners to understand and appreciate knowledge structures and paradigms of education, to make learners understand education as a discipline from different contexts and perspectives, to develop professionals for effective participation in educational actions
and discourses in different areas of education, and to create a community of scholars adequately equipped for participation in educational discourses. Friends, MA education program has wider career opportunity and placement. After pursuing MA education program, you can appear UGC NET and JRF in education discipline. You can also pursue PhD in education discipline. After pursuing MA education program, you can be a faculty in the liberal discipline of education, and you can also be a faculty in teacher education institutions with a B.Ed degree along with your MA education degree. You can also be an educational entrepreneur, and you can also work in different national and international organizations just like Commonwealth of Learning, UNESCO, UNICEF, World Bank, and also different research institutions. The eligibility of the program is a bachelor's degree from any recognized university. This program is of minimum duration of 2 years and maximum duration is of 4 years. Medium of instruction is English. However, the learners can write their assignment, term and examination, dissertation proposal and dissertation report in Hindi language. The program
Welcome to this short talk on what is structuralism. And I'd like to begin by kind of giving you a structure of what the talk today is going to be about. We begin with the objectives, which is to give you some insight into what is structuralism, a very, very important movement in the history of ideas and also for literary theory and criticism. From there on, we will introduce the concept of structuralism, what it means, where it originated from, its origins, the thinker or the person behind the movement called structuralism, Ferdinand De Saussure. We will talk about that. And we will be talking a little about existentialism because that was the movement that preceded structuralism in the history of ideas. Then we will look at some of the prominent structuralists like Roman Jakobson, Jacques Lacan, and Claude Lévi-Strauss. And thereafter, we will look briefly at structuralism in literature. We will look at thereafter, we will look at structuralism in literature and literary theory, and structuralism in anthropology and social anthropology, because structuralism had a very, very big part to play in the development of social anthropology, as we shall see later. Now, what is a structuralism? Structuralism is, as Simon Blackburn says, the phenomenon, the belief that phenomena of human life are not intelligible except through their interrelations. And these relations constitute a structure, and behind local variations in the surface phenomena, there are constant laws of abstract structure. Now, who was Simon Blackburn? Simon Blackburn was a professor of philosophy at the University of Cambridge. Until quite recently, he was Edna J. Cowrie Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And from between 1969 to 1990, he was a fellow and tutor at Pembroke College, Oxford. Now, he has a number of works to his credit, works such as Spreading the Word, 1984, Essay in Quasi-Realism, which was written in 1993, the Oxford Dictionary of Philosophy, 1994, Ruling Passions, 1998, Truth, which he co-edited with Keith Simmons in 1999. Now, we must remember that he is a philosopher. Think in 1999, Being Good in 2001, Lust in 2004, Mirror Mirror 2014, and between 1984 to 1990, he edited the journal which was called Mind. Now, what exactly is structuralism? All right, structuralism is an approach to analyzing culture, is a way of trying to understand culture. It is a guide to how cultures are created and treated. It is also a set of tools which enable us to understand culture. And it also seeks to discover the differences between individual texts. Now, as far as these many disciplines that are on your screen go, whether it is in sociology, in linguistics, in history, in literary criticism, literature, architecture, anthropology, psychology, or even economics, structuralism is a general theory of culture and a methodology. That implies that elements of human culture must be understood by way of their relationship to a much broader system. Now, structuralism, what it does is it works to uncover the structures that underlie all the things that we as human beings do. We think, the way we perceive, the way we feel. So, structuralism can be understood as the methodology that examines and implies the elements of human culture, the way it must be understood in their relationship to a much broader overarching system or a culture. Now, structuralism as a movement, like I said, started in Europe in the early 1900s. It grew mainly in France and Russia. So we had structural linguistics of Ferdinand De Saussure, the Prague School of Linguistics, the Moscow School, and the Copenhagen School of Linguistics. And it spread to America a little later. Now, structuralism, as I mentioned earlier, is an intellectual movement which succeeded existentialism, which brings me to my next point. What exactly was existentialism? Now, in very simple terms, right, existentialism is the belief that we are all individually responsible for trying to create purpose or meaning in our own lives. There is no overarching supreme power or a God or anybody else who is going to be responsible for creating a sense of purpose or a sense of meaning in our lives. We ourselves are responsible. It is the belief that our individual purpose and meaning in life or to life is not given to us by a God or gods, by a government or governments, by a teacher or teachers, or any other figures of authority or power. Now, existentialism, which was largely predominant between the 19th and the mid-20th century, as a theory, it explores the problem of human existence, and it focuses on the subjective thinking, the feeling, and the acting experiences of individuals. Now, all existential thinkers, they critiqued rationalism, and they were more concerned with the problem of meaning. What exactly is meaning? What is my purpose in life? What is the meaning of my existence? So for the existentialists, in a way of speaking, the individual starting point was always what they called the existential angst. Existentialism, it emphasizes action, freedom, and decisions as being very fundamental to our human existence. And it was opposed to the rationalist tradition as well as to positivism. And existentialism argues against definitions of human beings as being primarily rational. It in fact advocates taking responsibility for our own actions, living our lives the way we wish it to, without adhering to commonly held religious or social beliefs, is what existentialism is in a sense about. Now, structuralism was the movement that emerged after existentialism. And if you look at your screens, these are some of the prominent existentialist thinkers. So we had Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, Jaspers, Jean-Paul Sartre. We had Paul Tillich, Gabriel Marcel, Martin Heidegger, Simone de Beauvoir, and Albert Camus, who were some of the most prominent and notable existentialists. Now, coming back to the origins of structuralism, because today we are going to talk about what is structuralism, right? Structuralism, it began with the linguistics of Ferdinand de Saussure. And Ferdinand de Saussure talks about a couple of things which are integral to the whole idea behind structuralism. One is arbitrariness. Now, what he means by arbitrariness, we will discuss a little later. And two was his idea or his thoughts on what he meant by the sign. So the conceptual part of a linguistic utterance, like if I say tree, okay, or the value, is determined solely by the relations and the differences with other signs within the language. And Saussure talked about two very, very important concepts, which was the parole and the langue. So what exactly is the parole? Parole is the individual words or phrases or utterances. Langue is the relationship with other written words, phrases, and utterances. To give you a very, very simple example, what I'm speaking to you right now is my langue, is my parole, sorry. The English language, all right, or the Indian English that we speak in India would be the langue. Now, structuralism is a movement of theoretical investigations. It analyzes structures which kind of explain the whole universe of human beings, and it was primarily based and it grew out of France. The peak for structuralism came in the 1960s, and like I mentioned earlier, it takes its basic concepts from linguistics, from the linguistics that was practiced by Ferdinand de Saussure, where he thought that all signs were composed of some two aspects. One was the signifier and the other was the signified. And he's also believed that language is intellectually tangible only when words have meaningful relationships with others, and if there is an interrelation between words that give it a kind of meaning. And when we talk about structuralism, or we mention the term structuralism, the people and the movements that come to mind that are related or linked somehow to structuralism, of course, is Ferdinand de Saussure, the man credited behind the movement, Jean Piaget, who is actually also a psychologist and is more famous in educational psychology, Claude Lévi-Strauss, who is a social anthropologist and more well known in anthropological studies, and Roland Barthes. Now, Ferdinand de Saussure was born in 1857 and he died in 1913. He was a Swiss linguist, a semiotician, and a philosopher. His ideas laid the foundation for some of the most important developments, the most significant developments in linguistics as well as in semiotics in the 20th century. Now, he is considered to be, like I said, one of the founders of the 20th century, linguistics, and one of the two major founders, along with Charles Sanders Peirce, of semiotics, as it came to be known in America, and of semiology, as Saussure used to call it. Now, Professor Roy Harris was translated Saussure's works, and he summarizes basically Saussure's contribution to linguistics in particular, and he says the whole range of his contribution is to the whole range of human sciences, all right, and it is particularly marked in linguistics, in philosophy, in psychoanalysis, as well as in sociology and in anthropology. Now, Ferdinand de Saussure, the Swiss linguist, like we mentioned earlier, his main contribution to structuralism was his theory of a two-tiered reality about language. So he says that language, there is the langue, which is the abstract and the invisible layer, and the parole, which is the actual speech that we hear in real life. Like I said, if we look at langue as the English language, and the parole becomes the way we use it in everyday speech. So it's taking ideas from there. The social anthropologist, if you look at the left of your screen, you will see Claude Lévi-Strauss. He used this idea of the langue and the parole to determine the reality of myths. Now, as I told you, Claude Lévi-Strauss was a social anthropologist. So he took these ideas from Saussure, from structuralism, and he used them in his study of the myths. And he believed that all myths have an underlying pattern. All right, that forms the structure of the myths. And individually, of course, there are differences and there are, variations. Now, if we look at the next screen, you will see Saussure's structural linguistics and the three related concepts that he talks about. So you have langue, which is, again, like I mentioned, an idealized abstraction of language. You have parole, which is language as you actually use it. And then there is a distinction between the langue and the parole. The second concept that he talks about is the sign. Now, the sign is anything that conveys meaning. The sign is anything that conveys meaning, and it is divided between the signifier and the signified. Now, what exactly is the signifier? Things that give meaning, or words which give meaning, and the signified is the image that the sound invokes in our minds. The sign was composed of both a signified, an abstract concept or the idea, and a signifier, which is the perceived medium, the visual image or the sound that you hear. And Saussure, because different languages have different words to refer to the same object or a concept. Like take, for example, the word dog. In English, it's a dog. In Hindi, it is kutta. In Odia and Nepali, it is biralu. In Spanish, it is perro. In Malayalam, it is patti. So there is no logical reason behind why a dog is known by so many different names in different languages. But because it has been used, because if I mention the word dog, somebody else who is an English speaker understands what a dog is. So there is a communication between the sender and the receiver, or me and the person who I'm speaking to. There is an understanding that this particular animal is a dog. So similarly, in different languages, that is how the association forms and how words are made. So basically, this is what Saussure was talking about when he said that there is an arbitrariness. There is no rule, there is no logic, or there is no some sort of a system, which says that this is a microphone, this is a studio. Why is it a studio? Because it is not this, that, and the other. So similarly, why is a dog and not named something else? It is a totally arbitrary decision, but which has come to be because it has been in practice and people recognize the meaning, and hence it is named. And signs, therefore, they get their meaning, right? They get their meaning from the relationships, the contrasts, with other signs. So when you're talking about Saussure, when you're talking about structuralism or structural linguistics as it is, there is a very, very famous quote which is often, which goes like this: in language, there are only differences without positive terms. Like I said, why is a dog called a dog? Because it is not a cat, because it is not a rabbit, because it is not a horse. Hence, it is a dog. Now, the next few slides will show you what exactly we mean by Saussure's concept of the sign. So here we have the slides, if we can see that. What is the sign? The sign is something, Saussure, argued that linguistic science were composed of two parts, like we mentioned earlier. One was the signifier, right, which is the sound pattern of a word. So it either conveys a mental projection, like for instance, if you're silently narrating the lines or reciting the lines of a poem or a song to yourself, or a kind of text, a physical realization. And the signified, which is the concept or meaning of the word. So if you look at the picture at the bottom where you have the picture of a tree, you will realize the signifier is the physical form, the letters or the icon or the sound. When I say tree, the sound that reaches your ears. And the signified is the mental concept. So the minute I say tree, right, that is the sound that you hear. That is your signifier. And when you hear the word tree, the image that pops up in your mind is the mental concept. So similarly is the sign and the explanation behind the McDonald's sign. Now, structuralism, all right, structuralism is, like I said, the movement that looks at structures, that understands, that tries to understand and analyze structures. So it was a very different approach that structuralism followed, because it focused on the relationship between words on the one hand and the things in the world that they stand for. So if I say a cup, we know what a physical cup looks like. So we are trying to understand the structures and the relationship between the word cup and your idea of the cup and what the cup would actually denote. Now, the other very, very important and key notions in structural linguistics, which has stemmed from Ferdinand De Saussure's works, is things like paradigm, syntag, and value, is these three concepts. Now, Saussure, of course, he did not really develop all these concepts. These were developed by his people who studied and, took ideas from structuralism and did more studies on their own and built up their own understanding of structuralism. So, what is syntag and syntagmatic? A structural idealism is a class of linguistic units such as lexemes or morphemes or even constructions, which are possible within a certain position in a given linguistic environment, such as the position of words in a particular sentence. That is called the syntag. And the different functional role of each of these members of the paradigm is called the value or valeur in French. Now, the concept of a syntagmatic relationship and a paradigmatic relationship were introduced by Saussure in 1974, and they were used to distinguish two kinds of signifiers. Now, syntagmatic would mean positioning, the position where it is located. And paradigmatic would concern substitution. Or to give you a simple example, like if you look at movies, okay, or films as a visual media, if you think of films where the narration moves along a particular path, this happened, then something else happens as a result of what happened earlier, and something else, and it is moving in a linear manner. And then you see a movie which has a lot of flashbacks. Right? You have a man who's thinking about something and suddenly he remembers in his childhood what happened. So you have a flashback. Now that would be the paradigmatic relationship. Now the way words combine, right? The way words are put together to make a grammatically acceptable unit is what would be called a syntagmatic relationship, or what can be looked at as a structure. Now look at the sentence on your screen. Veena killed a mosquito. It is complete, it is sequential, and it is logical. If you look at the second sentence, a mosquito killed Veena. Here the position has been changed. Right? Now, this sentence by itself on its own does not make much logical sense. So how do signs get their meaning? Signs get their meaning from the sequential order in a syntagmatic relationship or a structure. The other two examples, the man ran down the road. The words are in relation to each other. It is making a logical sense. The cat hissed at the mouse. Again, logical sentence, and the words are in relation to each other. Now, in his most famous book, attributed, of course, to Ferdinand De Saussure, which is called Course in General Linguistics. Now, we have to remember that Saussure, during his lifetime, did not really publish too much. A Course in General Linguistics was a book that was made by two of his students who attended all his lectures. Now, in this particular book, the focus is on the underlying system of language, which he calls langue, and not really on the use of language or the parole or the speech. So the questions that structuralism looks at is how do the elements of language relate to each other? In the present, is it diachronically? Or is it synchronically? Synchronically, like I mentioned earlier, means in a linear fashion. Diachronically means there is there's substitution or there is a change in the positioning. Now, there were some very, very important thinkers associated with structuralism. And if you look at your screen, you will see three prominent people. You have Roman Jakobson, who was a linguist from Moscow. Jakobson co-founded the Moscow Linguistic Circle in 1915, and along with Viktor Shklovsky and Boris Ekumebaum, was involved in yet another Russian formalist group, which was the Society for the Study of Poetic Language in 1916. In 1926, he established the Prague Linguistic Circle, which engaged critically with the works of Saussure. And in 1943, he co-founded the Linguistic Circle of New York in America. Now, Roman Jakobson, as I mentioned earlier, in his 1958 paper called Linguistics and Poetics, he incorporated CSPS's ideas of semiotics and formulated, and I quote, "The poetic function projects the principle of equivalence from the axis of selection into the axis of combination." So basically, he argued that poetry is essentially metaphoric and prose is metonymic. Now, coming back to Roman Jakobson, he occupies a central place in the development of formalism as well as structuralism. He introduced the concept of metaphor and metonymy in his book, Two Aspects of Language and Two Types of Aphasic Disturbances, which was published in 1956. And he talks about two rhetorical figures representing two fundamental ways of organizing discourse. And he suggests that language has a bipolar structure, oscillating between the poles of metaphor and metonymy, and that the development of any course takes place along these two semantic lines. Now, Jakobson has some very interesting models, and I'd like for you to see the screen right now. His model of the functions of language, he distinguishes 6 elements or factors which affect communication, right, which are necessary for communication to take place. And you have context, addresser, or the one who's giving the message, the sender, the addressee, or the one who's receiving the message, the contact, the common code, and the message itself. And each factor is the focal point of a relation or a function that operates between the message and the factor. And the functions, of course, he looks at 6 functions, which is referential. For instance, the earth is round. Emotive, yuck. Connotative, come here. Phatic, hello. Metalingual, what do you mean by krill? And poetic, which is a smurf. Now, when we analyze the function of language for a given unit, right? So for example, let's look at a word or a text or an image. We kind of try and specify to which class or type it belongs. So you have a textual or a pictorial genre, and which functions are present or absent from it. And then we look at the characteristics of these functions, including the hierarchical relations and any other relations that may operate between them. Now, for now, I think we will end with Roman Jakobson because we seem to be running out of time. In the next session that we have, I would like to take it up for the discussion further with Jacques Lacan, Claude Lévi-Strauss, and look at structuralism in anthropology, in social anthropology, and at literature very, very briefly, before we go on to talk more about what is structuralism. So today what we've done is we've introduced the notion or the idea of what is structuralism. We have looked very briefly at the origins of structuralism, who were the important thinkers in structuralism, what were some of the basic concepts of structuralism, and we also looked at existentialism, which was a movement that preceded structuralism. Thank you very much for listening.
Hello viewers. This MA program in Environmental and Occupational Health focuses on the relationship between people and their environment and fosters safe and healthy communities. And this is of utmost importance. This program is an MA in Environmental and Occupational Health. The type of the program is a master's program and the medium of instruction will be in English. The duration of the program will be a minimum of 2 years and a maximum of 4 years. The target group will be a graduation from any discipline. Mainly the professionals working in environmental and occupational sector and non-governmental organizations are welcome to join. Doctors, nurses, paramedical graduates and employees can join the course. Employees from the Central Pollution Control Board, civil servants of the state and central governments, faculty, researchers and students in universities, research organizations and colleges will find this program very interesting. Graduates aspiring to pursue a career in environmental management, occupational health and safety, industrial health and safety will also find this program of useful relevance. The job opportunities for this program is tremendous. They can work as environmental health and safety specialist, occupational health and safety specialist in various organizations, HSE coordinator and protection officers. They can also work as worksite wellness coordinators, public administration and safety professionals. They can also work as industrial hygienists and ergonomists in the various organizations. Then the safety and environmental health managers, toxicologists, health and safety engineering specializations are also very important. The objectives of this program include the following. They will discuss the impact of the environmental hazards on human health. Then they will describe the policies, laws, standards and the measurement.
Welcome back. We were talking about structuralism earlier and we were looking at three of the most important thinkers associated with structuralism. So the person that we last spoke about was Roman Jakobson. Now I'd like to talk to you about Jacques Lacan. Now, Jacques-Marie Emile Lacan was born in 1901 and he died in 1981. He was a very major figure in Parisian intellectual life for much of the 20th century. He was sometimes referred to as the French Freud, and he was, is a very important figure in the history of psychoanalysis. His teachings and writings explore the significance of Freud's discovery of the unconscious, both in theory as well as in practice, and of analysis itself, as well as in relation to a wide range of other disciplines. Over the course of the past 50 years, Lacanian ideas have become central to the various receptions of things in psychoanalysis. And Lacan, he is very, very well known both in France as well as globally. He has contributed immensely to the field of aesthetics, to literary criticism, as well as film theory. And building their work on Lacanian theory, you have Louis Althusser, and more recently you have Ernesto Laclau, Yanis Stavronakis, and Slavoj Zizek, who have worked on political theory, and they have looked at analyzing ideology and institutional reproduction. So, structuralism, what it does is it begins with a particular idea. Like in the case of Saussure, it began with linguistics. From there on, people have taken strands and concepts of structuralism and used it in their own fields of study. Now, in the mid to the late 1900s, the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, he called for a return to Freud's work. Now, Sigmund Freud, as you know, was the one who was instrumental in talking about psychoanalysis and talking about dreams, how dreams can be interpreted to understand the deeper, the inner workings of the subconscious mind. Now, Lacan worked along with Freud a little later, and he asked that the focus should be on Freud's works. But when he asked for a return to Freud's work, it was with a renewed focus on what was on the unconscious, and with a greater importance being paid to language. Now, Lacan, he had a good understanding of linguistics, and he drew heavily from his knowledge of linguistics and to study psychoanalysis. And he believed that language was a very, very important piece of the puzzle, that could help resolve many of the issues that crop up in psychoanalysis. Now, there are three key concepts of Lacanian psychoanalysis which makes it separate and distinct from Freud, and that is, he talks about the real, the symbolic order, and the mirror stage. Now, these things we will take up when we talk about psychoanalysis at a later date. Now, the third important person who drew on structuralism and used it in his own field of study was Claude Lévi-Strauss. Now, Claude Lévi-Strauss was a French anthropologist who became one of the 20th century's greatest intellectuals by developing structural anthropology as a method of understanding human society and human culture. He applied his method to numerous cultural systems, and he studied things like kinship, structures, and mythological patterns. He was a leading proponent of structuralism, and Lévi-Strauss's influence is felt extremely strongly in the social sciences, in philosophy, in comparative religion, as well as in the study of literature. And he focused mostly on trying to look at or analyze the deeper unity we share as human beings, in spite of us having so many different outward differences. Now, Levi-Strauss lived in Brazil from 1935 to 1939, and it was during this time that he carried out his first ethnographic fieldwork. And he was there in the Mato Grosso and the Amazon rainforest. Now, during his stay at the New School for Social Research in the 1940s, with the Russian formalist, right, the person we talked about earlier, Ramon Jakobson, introduced Claude Lévi-Strauss to the works of Ferdinand De Saussure, who was a great linguist. And Strauss foresaw the importance of semiology for understanding culture, and he studied coded relations linked to social interactions. So he began to share his findings in his published works, beginning with the first publication, The Elementary Structures of Kinship, which appeared in 1949, which is an important anthropological work on kinship. Then, like I said, he lived in Brazil from 1935 to 1939, and he carried out his first ethnographic fieldwork. He initially studied the Guaycuru and the Bororo Indian tribes. He lived there with them for a while. Several years later, he went back again, and he stayed there for a year. And it was this experiences that actually helped Levi-Strauss's professional identity as an anthropologist to grow. And apart from this, the elementary structure of kinship, which he published in 1949, he had several other famous publications. The most famous, of course, was his autobiographical work, which was titled Tristes Tropiques in 1955, which describes his time in Brazil. He also wrote Structural Anthropology in 1958. Look at the way the word structure is coming into place. The Savage Mind in 1962, Mythologies, there are 4 volumes of it between 1964 and 72, and The Raw and the Cooked in 1970. Now, Claude Lévi-Strauss advocated that language preconditioned human culture, as was evidenced in the symbolic order of religious and social life as well as aesthetics. Now, he takes the concept of the symbolic order from his understanding of psychoanalysis. He believed that cultural patterning is influenced by the huge reservoir of the unconscious part of our mind, what he calls the unconscious, and of course the universal structures of our mind. Now, how does the study of structuralism impact anthropology and social anthropology? According to structural theory, meaning is produced and reproduced within a culture through the various practices, the phenomenon, and the activities that serve as systems of signification. So that is how he imbibes, structuralism into understanding anthropology. For example, Lévi-Strauss analyzed in the 1950s cultural phenomena, including mythology, including kinship. He looked at the alliance theory and the incest taboo, and he also studied food preparation. Now, the Prague School of Linguistics, which we mentioned at the very beginning when we looked at the map of Europe and how structuralism grew in Europe, it analyzed sounds based on the presence or the absence of certain features. So you have voiceless or the voiced, like the difference between the p and the b. Now, Lévi-Strauss used it in his conceptualization of the universal structures of the mind, which he held to operate based on pairs of binary oppositions. So he came up with this concept of binary opposition. So you have hot versus cold, male and female. You have the raw and the cooked, the taboo and the relationships that you can marry into. So these were the things that Claude Lévi-Strauss, used structuralism to kind of work out. Now, apart from that, in literary theory and criticism, what role does structuralism play? Right now, structuralist criticism, it looks at literary texts and relates it to a much larger structure, which could be, let's say, if you take a novel by Charles Dickens, let's say Hard Times. and then you are relating Hard Times to all the Victorian novels, or you're relating Hard Times to the other novels that Charles Dickens wrote. So you're relating it to a genre, you're relating it to a range of intertextual connections. So you're looking at Hard Times. Okay, it is talking about the times which was, towards the during the Victorian age. So let us look at all the novels that deal with a particular age. So you're doing this kind of a range of intertextual connections, or you look at it as a model of a universal narrative structure, or even as a system where there are recurrent patterns and motives in the novel that we just talked about. Right? Now, the second thing that happens is in the field of structural semiotics, what happens is you base your study on the fact that there is a structure in every text, which is why it is much more easier for somebody who's a reader, an experienced reader, to read and analyze and interpret a text than for somebody who is not much of a reader. And the third thing that comes across in as far as literary theory and criticism and structuralism go is that everything that is written, right, is governed by a set of rules, very, very specific rules, which could be the rules of the grammar of literature. So in which you study, come to know about only when you're in an educational institution, and knowing the rules of grammar, you use that to interpret texts or any narratives. Now, Vladimir Prop, he was a Russian folklorist. He sought to find a similar syntagmatic relationship between plot elements. So he identified 31 plot functions, which according to him serve as a stable, constant element in a tale, and it is independent of how and by whom they are fulfilled. So for example, you have sentences like this: one of the family members absents himself from the family home, right? The villain causes harm or injury to a member of the family, the hero returns. So these are the kind of plot functions that Prop identified. Now, all of this goes on to show that language is inherently structured. It is structural and it is determined by differences. Now, if you look at the next slide, you will see Vladimir Prop. His dates are 1895 and 1970. And you see A.J. Greimas with 1917 to 1992. And of course, you see Claude Lévi-Strauss, 1908 to 2009. Now, literary structuralism, or the role that structuralism plays for us in literature or in literary criticism, is often followed from the lead that these three gentlemen take. They are all looking at, they are all trying to seek out, looking for deeper, deeper elements, either in stories, either in myths, anecdotes, in anything, right? So the kind of the literary, the influence of structuralism in literature or literary criticism stems largely from the kind of work that these three gentlemen did. Now, summing up, what we've done today is looked very briefly at what is structuralism. We've looked at the origins of structuralism, how it began in Europe, the founder or the man credited behind structuralism, which is Ferdinand De Saussure. We looked at what his sign means. We examined very briefly existentialism as a movement, as an intellectual movement. And we looked at structuralists such as Ramon Jacobson, Jacques Lacan, and Claude Lévi-Strauss. And then we looked at the influence that structuralism has in anthropology as well as in literature. And we briefly looked at Prop. So now the next part of this discussion, we will be doing a few more details on what exactly is structuralism. So here today what I want to do is again begin by introducing structuralism. I also want to talk very briefly about the origins of structuralism, a little bit about Saussure, more to do with Vladimir Prop, how structuralism grew in the United States of America, and then look at American structuralism and the difference between European and American structuralism. So what exactly is structuralism? It is an approach to analyzing all social and cultural phenomena. It is a guide to understanding culture, and how cultures are to be treated. It is a set of tools that help you understand culture, but that which also seeks to discover the differences between different texts or individual texts. So structuralism, it identifies structures, systems of relationships which kind of endow sign. Okay, so you have words or items, you have clothes, cars, table manners, rituals, all of these things can be studied with identities and meanings, and it shows us the ways in which we think. Now, if you look at the map again, like I said, structuralism has a very important role to play in all these disciplines, and all these disciplines rely on structuralism to analyze whether it is the culture in sociology, in linguistics, in architecture, history, psychology. Now, if you take a look at this map very briefly, you will see that it grew primarily in Europe. It was much later that it spread to the America. And as an intellectual movement, of course, it succeeded existentialism. Now, late in the 19th century, towards the second half or the later half of the 19th century, the times were such that language was to be studied historically and genetically, which means how did language or groups of language originate, and how did language or languages evolve and develop. So there was this obsession with change, which kind of led to a neglect. Since you're so obsessed with studying the change, what is happening is you are not actually looking at what was changing. So Saussure, what he wanted to do was to hold the subject of study, which is language, right? He wanted to be able to hold language steady, keep it steady, constant, long enough, so that so that you can study the permanent structures in it, so that you can investigate the permanent structures of language. Now, like we said, it was the origins lie in the works of Ferdinand De Saussure, who was a Swiss linguist, a semiotician, and a philosopher. Saussure was born in Geneva. He studied mainly in Germany. He taught in Paris. In 1891, he taught at the University of Geneva. He died in 1913 in Geneva. He was an Indo-Europeanist, Sanskrit and its derivative languages specialist. He knew French, German, English, Latin, and Greek, and Sanskrit, of course. In 1916, his book, Course in General Linguistics, was published. The first English translation, of course, came out in 1959 by Wade Baskin, and in Britain and America, and Professor Roy Harris, who was a professor of general linguistics, who also translated his work, which was in 1983. Now, what Saussure does is he says that language can be studied along two axes. One is the temporal or the diachronic axis, and the other is the spatial or the synchronic axis. Now, synchronic linguistics is concerned with logical and psychological connections between coexisting items, which form a system, which is perceived by the same collective consciousness. Whereas a diachronic linguist, he or she will be more concerned with connections between sequence of items that are not really perceived by the same collective consciousness, but which replace one another without themselves being part of a system. So what you have is a synchronic linguist would study a language statistically in its given state at a particular moment in time. A synchronic linguist would work on the premise that the capacity of language to alter unceasingly may be set aside for the sake of studying its more or less permanent constitution, whereas a diachronic linguist would study a language as it is changing through time. Now, Saussure also stressed the importance of considering each item in relationship to all other items within the system. So for analyzing sentences, we use a symptomatic approach, word by word in the horizontal sequence of the parts or syntax of the sentence. The examples from before: the man ran down the road, the cat hissed at the mouse, the rain fell on the field. And like I mentioned, Vladimir Prop, he tried to do something similar. So he looked at syntagmatic relationships between plot elements. Now, if you look at Saussure's linguistic model, he explains parole as phonetic and semantic signs, the phonemes and the sememes. Now, this will make a lot of sense to people who are students of linguistics. A linguistic sign joins a signifier, which is a conventional sound construction, to a signification, which is the semantic value or the meaning of it. Now, such a sign does not join a thing and its name, but an allowable concept to a sound image. It's not joining a thing and a name, but it is giving you a sound image. So the sign, therefore, has meaning only when it exists within a system. Like I said, in the English-speaking world, if we speak in English, right, we know exactly what a dog means, because the word dog exists within the system of the English language. Like, for instance, the word kutta would make sense. Everybody would understand what it is, what it connotes, what it is in the Hindi-speaking world. So an item is meaningful only when it is within its originating structure. So building on Saussure's linguistic model, like I told you, Vladimir Prop, he looked at Russian folk tales, right, as structural units that together contained a number of types of characters, or what he calls actants, and actions, which he later calls functions. Now, the functions recur and thus constitute in their unity the grammar or rules for the Russian folk tales. So, stemming from linguistics, each one takes bits and pieces of structural linguistics, the concepts of it, and uses it in their own areas of study. So we have Prop looking at the Russian folktale based on structuralism. Then we had Victor Shklovsky, who developed the concept of estrangement or defamiliarization. That he explained the concept in 1917 in a very important essay called The Art as Technique. And it was in this essay, where he talks about the need to turn something that has become over-familiar, right, like a cliche within a literary canon, into something that is new, into something that is revitalized, into something that we now, through the process of defamiliarization, make anew. So Shklovsky is also famous for having contributed the story distinction, and which kind of, separates the sequence in which events are presented in the works. In poetry, we have, this is used mostly in poetry because there is a particular drive towards the strange and away from the familiarity of words, the rhythms, the patterns, the choice of language. So Victor Shklovsky's idea of defamiliarization or estrangement works very well in poetry. Now, we seem to be running very rapidly out of time. So before we start talking about other things like structuralism in the United States, how it grew, and we talk about the difference between European and structure thing, I think we should just kind of sum up right now, and we shall talk about the spread of structuralism in America, the difference between European structuralism, how American structuralism grew, who were the American structuralists, and in what ways they looked at structuralism in a later a talk with you. Thank you very much for listening in.